There's the clicker. Yeah, it actually. Yeah. But it,
Have any so any of these are available. Okay. Well, if you have refreshments and fruit. What do you try?
See right here. Yeah. I think it's just cut like a run book.
Next to that is Jeff.
yeah.
We still got your.
No, they haven't.
Right there, okay, right there.
Yeah, they're looking.
That's all right. That's all right. It's always like I did. That's just perfect. That's it. All day, all day, all day. I can spend it all day. And now
Thank you.
Yeah, I had 2 extra in my bag.
I know, and I was like, I should.
I was gonna ask you that, do we, I didn't know how that worked. Okay, yeah, and I saw how, yeah, since there was so much near the end, I said, well, I started to walk them to, but yeah. Yeah. Okay. Be prepared for whatever. Did you hear us?
see. Oh, well.
Very well, I believe. But you,
Get there early to get a seat on the back rail.
well, we were in the study. We're in the study here.
Right here. Like right here? Yeah, right here is fine.
We stay there.
Yeah, but how you doing?
How you doing? I hope I haven't been in about 30 days. It's close, it's close.
That's why I heard it's close.
Yeah.
I don't know much.
Thank goodness you and me don't have an
Hey,
obligation. You know?
tell me.
Yeah. Hard. That's a good bar.
It is a good bar. Yeah, so.
Get out here, had some damn big pictures. You know, back in the day, that was we could take off, it's like, but now. You know, you got them all, I got them all. No joke shop.
I think he's right here, right here.
It's harder to pack up.
That means you get in the trouble. You're right.
Test.
We'll just.
Oh, I got that.
Great. See.
I was like, all right, I want to sit here and have it say something else. Oh, yep. Do you think, I mean, I'm guessing y'all will be, the meetings will be moved over to the new GAV. And I think they're probably on, have those automated, yes. I did the tour 2 weeks ago, and so programmed them in. I think you do for doing the meeting, before the meeting. So, and so they were talking about how you would have the automated process for name plate names. So for the committee rooms where different committees meet. So it was really neat. I didn't ask how it works. Right, and they program it in. It's one of their IT people. When we were walking through, I know. Right. Maybe tell them where you want them to sit. Okay. Yeah. Okay, and then you just do that, right? So I guess, yeah, so that does throw a kink in it.
Hey, man, I'm gonna have my chairman. Your father the other day, he didn't say me when you're walking.
It's just like the co-chair seat right here.
Yeah. You live over there now.
They're always,
Who's upstairs room? That is, Victoria. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then this would be, I guess, better spool. Well, you always put it right here until the, I'm gonna go to the restroom. I'll leave you with this. Well, here, just hold on to that. I'm gonna use laser and I'll bring it back.
Test, 1, 2. Test, 1, 2.
oh, I did. Sounds nice to you. What? You did. See here about Luke. I got a big crowd. Big crowd here. And
Hey, how are you? Good.
No. Good.
Grow some more.
Have you been?
Pretty good. Busy. Yeah, they have us, pretty much ready to move. That's, they have us pretty much getting ready to move.
Yeah, where are you guys?
Well, right now, either Riverfront Plaza or Bank of America.
Good to see you. Good to see how you doing?
Right, so, yeah, we are. We toured different places, and so, and those were our top two. So they didn't give us True West to tour.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, let's just move things on.
Right.
Okay.
We just need to hold on to what we got.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Cause you don't want to be.
But I need a mic.
She's got it right there.
But how do I?
Well, that's one.
I know it.
Well, I don't have a gavel, so I will use my cane. I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have as usual, a busy agenda, and I'd like to start with some comments from Hal.
Madam Chair, Vice Chair. We have 3 items. First, we'll present the findings of our review of self-sufficiency in childcare. Next, we'll present the results of our evaluation of occupations wishing to receive enhanced retirement benefits. And then finally, we'll present our annual report on state spending. Madam Chair, before we begin our agenda, I'd like to introduce the newest member of our staff. He is Hannah Garfinkel. Hannah is behind you. Hannah received her BA in English and Public Policy, as well as her Master of Arts in Public Policy from William & Mary. Hannah has been assigned to the Go team. Thank you. Madam Chair, the first item that I did this morning is self-sufficiency. As you may recall, this study was directed by Commission resolution last year. The study has involved an extensive analysis of available data to answer questions whether Virginians participating in state public assistance programs are moving from poverty to self-sufficiency, and the extent to which childcare is accessible and affordable in Virginia. A major contribution of the study is the quantification of the childcare service, which is done for every Virginia. I'd like to thank state and local Department of Social Services staff for their assistance, as well as Department of Education staff. With that, I'll turn it over to Tracy Smith, who oversaw the study. Tracy.
Morning, Madam Chair.
Morning.
Before Stephanie comes up to brief you all on the study of self-sufficiency in childcare, I just wanted to explain a little bit how we've organized the presentation for you tonight. The first part of Stephanie's presentation is going to cover her team's evaluation of the 2 primary government assistance programs that aim to move program participants towards self-sufficiency. And these are the TANF program and the SNAP employment and training program. The team has developed several practical recommendations for how to improve the design and delivery of these programs, but the extent to which these, or really any program changes, can improve program participant outcomes is limited. It's limited both by the locally administered nature of the programs, as well as the multitude and severity of the day-to-day challenges that these particular program participants face in improving their circumstances, many of which can't be mitigated by these programs alone. Still, Virginians who are eligible for benefits and services are entitled to receive them. And so Virginia should do all it can to ensure that the programs are designed and administered most effectively, and that program participants are given the opportunity to benefit from all services that can help them improve their circumstances, especially the state's workforce development system, which is grossly underutilized by low-income Virginians. The second part of Stephanie's presentation focuses on childcare. And of course, as you know, this is closely linked to the low-income Virginians' ability to work, enroll in training and education, and move towards self-sufficiency. And in fact, back when you asked us to do this study last year, we originally had two separate studies that we were contemplating, one on self-sufficiency and a separate one on childcare. And then someone made the very wise observation that because these two topics are really inextricably linked, why don't we put them together into one study? And so that's why we have what we have for you this morning. As Hal mentioned, the team has really strived.
Hey, ma'am.
Yes.
I'm getting a text from some people here on a video here and they say they can't hear you. I don't know if the mic's. Delegate Marshall. I don't know if there's some reason.
Move that closer.
They said he couldn't hear.
Is this
Yeah.
better? Does that sound better to everyone?
Sounds better here. Hopefully they can hear a little bit better.
Let me know if that
Thank
doesn't
you.
get better, and
Okay.
then I'll come up with something else. So as Hal mentioned, the team has really strived to quantify the extent to which the childcare shortage, the extent to where it is, where it's concentrated in the state. And we wanted to do that to give policymakers a sense for where and how to start addressing the problem. As you know, the cost and location of childcare is market driven. And that makes the shortage a challenging problem for the state to grapple with. State resources can, though, be used to help childcare providers address their perennial staffing challenges. And state resources can be used to expand existing programs that aim to reduce the cost of childcare for low-income families. And the state can also work to minimize the bureaucratic hurdles associated with operating those programs to encourage more providers to participate. Madam Chair, in the interest of time, we've decided to omit some of our findings and recommendations from this morning's presentation. It's quite an extensive report, and so I would recommend that you do consult the full report for more depth and detail on these and the topics that we're not able to cover this morning. Madam Chair, I will go ahead and introduce Stephanie Paps, who was the project leader for the study, to brief you on her team's findings.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the
morning.
commission. My name is Stephanie Paps, and I was the project leader for the self-sufficiency and childcare study. I'd like to thank Kate Hopkins, Dylan Wild, Mitch Perry, and Martha Tyler for their assistance on this study. This study was directed by the commission in November of last year. You asked us to look at a variety of topics related to how effectively the state's financial assistance programs help their participants achieve self-sufficiency. You also asked us to look at the availability and affordability of childcare services across the Commonwealth. Slide 3 summarizes our research, which included data analysis, a survey of childcare providers, documents, and over 70 interviews. More information about our research is included in the report. Our study found that few Virginians who qualify for the state self-sufficiency program exit poverty or achieve self-sufficiency. We found that the state's canopy policy, low participation in the workforce development system, and a multitude of client barriers contribute to these disappointing outcomes. We found that the cost of childcare is unaffordable, especially for the youngest children, and there's a statewide shortage of childcare that disproportionately affects families with infants and toddlers. And we found that the state has already undertaken initiatives to improve childcare access and has limited additional options beyond maintaining current expansions of the childcare subsidy, which will expire in fiscal year 24. I'd like to start by giving you some high-level background on self-sufficiency and the state assistance programs. There are 4 measures of a household's ability to pay for all of their necessary expenses without any outside assistance. Essentially, these are measures of the extent to which households can make ends meet. First, there's the federal poverty threshold, or FPL. This often serves as the qualifying criteria for financial assistance programs, and it tends to be significantly lower than any other measure of self-sufficiency. This is because it doesn't take into account differences in family makeup, cost of living differences by locality, or some modern living expense. As you can see, regardless of where a family of two lives in Virginia, the FPL for them is approximately $20,000. Researchers use at least 3 other measures of household financial need to determine whether a household is self-sufficient. These other measures are the self-sufficiency standard developed by researchers at the University of Washington, the ALICE threshold developed by the United Way, and the living wage calculator developed by researchers at MIT. Each of these 3 measures take local cost of living differences, family makeup, including children's ages, and modern living expenses into account. Each measure uses a slightly different methodology and data, which results in some differences in income that they would say is necessary to make ends meet. We use the self-sufficiency standard throughout this study because it assumes the lowest income of the 3 measures to afford basic necessities without assistance. Numerous programs provide financial assistance, but we focused on TANF-U, SNAP-ENT, and the child care subsidy because of their ties to self-sufficiency, and they're administered by the state. The TANF-U program provides cash assistance payments to eligible adults with children. TANF-U has the strongest tie to self-sufficiency of the 3 programs we focused on because both federal and state law say that helping families achieve self-sufficiency is the purpose of the program. Generally, adult TANF recipients are required to participate in the VIEW program to continue receiving their TANF benefit. VIEW is the employment and training component of Virginia's TANF program. SNAP Employment and Training, or SNAP-ENT, is Virginia's other self-sufficiency focused program. This is a voluntary program that SNAP recipients can opt into. If they opt into the program, it functions very similarly to VIEW. Participants are required to work or participate in educational training programs, and SNAP-ENT can provide funding for support services that help them to be able to work. The program is voluntary for recipients, and it's also voluntary for local departments of social services to offer it. It's currently offered by 37 local departments, which provides access to the program to around 60% of SNAP recipients. However, because the program is voluntary, participation is low. Less than 1% of SNAP recipients actually participate in SNAP-ENT. The child care subsidy pays for some or all of an eligible family's child care expenses. To participate in the program, a family has to meet income criteria, have children under age 13, and the parents must be working, looking for work, or participating in an educational or training program. Approximately 40,000 children were enrolled in the program at the end of fiscal year 23. As you all know, Virginia has used federal pandemic relief funds to expand this program in the past couple of years. Funds were used to serve more kids, reduce family co-payments, and improve reimbursement rates. Slide 10 shows the hypothetical values of a few different assistance programs for a family of 4 in Richmond. A family wouldn't necessarily receive all of these benefits, even if they were income eligible for them. The child care subsidy and the housing choice voucher are not entitlements, which means that even if a family qualifies, if funding isn't available, they'll be placed on a wait list. The housing choice voucher can be particularly scarce. We learned in our affordable housing study from 2021 that wait lists in some Virginia localities can be over 10 years long. Additionally, the TANF program is time limited, so even if a family qualifies, if they've met the federal 5-year maximum or the state 2-year spell limit, they would not receive the benefit. As you can see in the graphic, the estimated average TANF benefit is around $301 monthly, and the estimated average SNAP benefit is around $169 monthly. TANF, SNAP, and the child care subsidy are primarily funded by federal funds, although each program has some type of state contribution involved. Madam Chair, I'll pause here for questions.
Are there questions? I don't see any.
In this next section, I'll discuss our finding related to how successful clients are at improving their level of self-sufficiency when they participate in VIEW and SNAP-ENT. To conduct this work, we reviewed the employment and wage outcomes for a cohort of VIEW, SNAP-ENT, and SNAP clients who received benefits for any period of time in the first half of calendar year 2018. We used quarterly wage files from the Virginia Employment Commission to review their wages between July of 2018 and December of 2022, so approximately a 4-year period. Before we get to the findings of that analysis, though, I'll provide a little bit of information about how many Virginians have incomes below the self-sufficiency standard and poverty line, and how many Virginians potentially qualify for these programs. Slide 13 shows that 27% of Virginia households have incomes below the self-sufficiency standard and likely have trouble making ends meet without assistance. Of those 856,000 households with incomes below the self-sufficiency standard, 328,000 households have incomes below the poverty threshold. That means that approximately 10% of Virginia households have incomes below the poverty threshold. However, these percentages can vary pretty significantly by region. Some regions of Southside and Southwest Virginia have a larger percentage of households with incomes below the poverty threshold and self-sufficiency standard. One of the report's appendices breaks those statistics down by a regional level. As the last slide showed, approximately 328,000 households live in poverty. Of those households, only 36,000 households, or about 11%, could potentially be eligible for TANF. The reason that so few households are potentially eligible for TANF is that the income eligibility criteria is very low. Of those potentially eligible households, approximately 16,000 households are actually enrolled in TANF. Then, not all TANF clients are required to enroll in the VIEW program. Just under 10,000 clients are enrolled in VIEW. So of all the Virginia households in poverty, only around 3% are enrolled in VIEW at any given time and participating in its employment and training programs that can potentially help them improve their level of self-sufficiency. Our primary finding in this section is that self-sufficiency clients make some progress improving their employment and earnings, but that progress is relatively limited. This finding is based on the data analysis we conducted looking at the wage and employment outcomes for a cohort of VIEW and SNAP E&T clients who were enrolled for any period of time in the first half of 2018. However, this finding is in line with findings from academic research into the outcomes of families participating in assistance programs, as well as similar studies that have been previously conducted in Virginia and in other states. Slide 16 shows the percentage of self-sufficiency clients in this cohort who were employed for any number of hours in each quarter beginning in the third quarter of 2018 through the fourth quarter of 2022. The largest percentage of the cohort was employed in the earliest quarters, closest to their enrollment in the programs. In the earliest 2 quarters, around 60% of both the VIEW and SNAP E&T clients were employed. When the pandemic began in March of 2020, you can see that the employment rate for the cohort began dropping, ultimately bottoming out at 44% for VIEW clients and 46% for SNAP E&T clients in the second quarter of 2021. In the quarters that followed, the employment rate also increased, and by the end of 2022, the employment rate was around 55% for VIEW and SNAP E&T clients, which is a lower employment rate than the cohort initially had in the end of 2018. Although the pandemic obviously impacted the employment rate for the cohort that we reviewed, we may still have seen the same general employment pattern, even in the absence of the pandemic. Research in other states found that some clients typically have their highest employment rates in the quarters closest to their enrollment, and as time goes on, the employment rate typically drops. Median wages across the cohort did increase in 2018. For VIEW clients in the cohort, the median wage increased by 23% from around $13,000 in 2018 to about $16,000 in 2022. For SNAP E&T clients in the cohort, the median wage increased by 43% from $12,000 in 2018 to about $17,000 in 2022. As a comparison group, we also included what happened to clients who only had SNAP. These clients didn't have access to any of the services or supports that VIEW or SNAP E&T clients have, and they increased their wages by 26%, which is similar to the percentage increase experienced by the VIEW clients. Even though all 3 groups increased their median wages between 2018 and 2022, the median wages for all 3 groups are still below the federal population. Between 2018 and 2022, the percentage of the cohort that earned wages in self-sufficiency increased slightly from 0 to 2% for VIEW clients and from 3% to 7% for snappy and T clients. The conclusions that we drew from this analysis is that Virginia self-sufficiency clients are making some progress towards improving their employment status and increasing their wages. The progress is limited and oftentimes it's not enough to lift these clients out of poverty. This limited progress that self-sufficiency clients make is likely related to the barriers to employment that these clients face. Things like having limited education or training, lacking any previous work experience, not having access to reliable transportation or childcare, or having untreated behavioral or substance use problems. However, the self-sufficiency programs are supposed to provide supports that help clients overcome these barriers so they can pursue self-sufficiency. Madam Chair, I'll pause here for questions.
Yes. Well,
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in your calculations on the previous page, well, a couple of them, did you take into account the increased standard of living? I mean, you talked about they're making slightly more, a few of them more to work, but just the cost to live over that same period of time.
Delegate Wilk, that's a good question. When we looked at their wages, and we did the comparison of how their wages changed between 2018 and 2021, we did adjust that for inflation. And then with the federal poverty line, we compared it to the federal poverty threshold that was in effect for each one of those years. So that takes into account the cost of living changes that occurred during.
Madam Chair.
yes, Senator McPike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 14 of the slide presentation, does the 16,000 and 10,000, is that solely limited to those who are not exempt under TANF work requirements?
Senator McPike, the 16,000 is the total enrollment for TANF clients in the total program. And then the 10,000 are the individuals who are enrolled with VIEW who are not exempt from the VIEW program. So that wouldn't include any of the child-only households or people that qualify for some other type of exemption to the VIEW program.
Okay, so 6,000 would have disability, having care requirement, education requirement, whatever the TANF exemption requirements. Would that be right?
16,000 would include those folks who may have been subject to some exemption to the VIEW program.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Return to slide 17. How much of that is because of participation in the program versus just an increase in the minimum wage?
Delegate Orrock, that's an excellent question. And some of that would be attributable to the increase in minimum wage.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Delegate Orr.
Can you quantify some? And Madam Chair, I guess as a follow-up, because I would presume a disproportionate number of folks in this would previously have been employed at the minimum wage level because of the lack of skill and training, that kind of thing. So was that something y'all able to quantify, or some kind of the best we're going to get?
Yeah, Delegate Orrick, that's a good question. And I think that when it comes to the minimum wage changes, there are some limitations to the data that we have from the Virginia Employment Commission, and that it doesn't show the number of hours folks were working. So we're not able to say what the hourly wage was for these people. So we can't know how much of this was a minimum wage change, but certainly some of this change is attributable to that.
Delegate Orrock, if I could just try to clarify that to sound what Stephanie said. I think that increases in the minimum wage really would not have started to take effect until maybe halfway through this period.
Right, I understood that. Yeah.
The next section will focus on some areas where the administration and design of VIEW and SNAP-E&T may be limiting the progress that these clients are making, and some options the state has to improve these programs and provide expanded opportunities to VIEW and SNAP-E&T clients to pursue improved employment and earnings. We found that few self-sufficiency clients participate in the state's workforce programs, and that's at least partially because coordination between the state social services system and workforce development system is limited. Slide 21 shows the percentage of TANF and SNAP clients who participate in the state's workforce development programs annually. In 2018, about 1.5% of TANF clients participated in the state's workforce development programs, but participation dropped following 2018. By 2022, 0.5% of the state's TANF clients and 0.2% of the state's SNAP clients were enrolling in the workforce development programs. Employment rates for TANF and SNAP clients who participated in the WIOA programs tended to be higher than all other TANF and SNAP clients by over 20 percentage points. While the services that the state's workforce system offers seems to be a good fit for self-sufficiency clients, the fact that very few self-sufficiency clients participate in the programs has been a longstanding problem. A 2005 JLARC study also found that very few TANF and SNAP clients were participating in workforce development programs. State statute requires that the Secretary of Health and Human Resources develop and maintain a plan that describes how the state's social services and workforce development systems would coordinate to serve VIEW clients, but that plan doesn't appear to exist. Without a state-level plan that describes how the two systems should coordinate, it's difficult for workforce development regions and local departments of social services to know what the expectations are around coordination. Local workforce development regions are supposed to have written memorandums of understanding, or MOUs, with each of the partners that operates a partner program. VIEW and SNAP E&T are partner programs. However, the local regions generally only have MOUs with some of the local departments of social services in their regions. This has resulted in less than half of local departments of social services even having these types of written agreements with their local workforce regions. And state law requires the workforce region to have MOUs with each partner agency, not just some. We found that through our interviews with staff at both local departments of social services and Virginia Career Work Centers, there were really varying levels of coordination between the two entities, and even varying levels of awareness about the other's programs and what they did. The state's workforce development system has an aspirational goal to have social services staff co-located at each Virginia Career Work Comprehensive Center, but that isn't consistently happening across the state. While co-location of social services staff at career work centers would be useful for self-sufficiency clients, co-location of career work staff at local departments of social services may be a more feasible option. Most self-sufficiency clients are familiar with their local social services office, and because there's a local department in almost every locality, local departments of social services may be more convenient for many self-sufficiency clients. Co-locating career work staff at local departments of social services would give self-sufficiency clients access to the specialized services of the state's workforce development system. Slide 26 and 27 summarize our recommendations to improve coordination between social services and workforce development systems. These first two recommendations involve strategies to improve the extent to which local departments of social services are signed to MOUs with their local workforce development region. These next three recommendations involve additional strategies to improve how these two systems work together to serve clients. Chapter 3 contains more detail around the recommendations for coordination with the workforce development system. Our next finding is that local departments of social services aren't fully spending VIEW funding that's available to them to provide services to clients that could help them overcome barriers to employment. Local departments go through a pretty common series of steps for each client once they're determined eligible for TANF and referred to VIEW. The local worker assesses the client, develops a service and activity plan, arranges for services to be delivered to the client, and checks in with the client regularly. The types of services that VIEW funds can pay for clients abroad. It can include bus tickets, car repairs, gas cards, work uniforms, tuition for a training course, job-related background checks, childcare, and a variety of other services and supports. However, we found that an increasing number of local departments are spending less than half of the funds they have available for these services. The figures that we're showing you on slide 30 are pre-pandemic figures because the VIEW work requirements were suspended up until January of this year. The number of local departments spending less than half of their view funds increased from 18 departments in 2014 to 28 departments in 2019. Those 28 departments spending half or less of their view funds were serving 1/4 of view clients. This is significant because one of the primary benefits of participating in view from the client perspective is access to services that can help them overcome those hurdles they may have becoming employed and improving their earning potential. One way that local departments could use view service funds to support their clients is by spending funds on childcare expenses. Currently, view clients become eligible for the childcare subsidy when they enter the program. However, the childcare subsidy covers the cost of tuition plus $100 for registration fees. According to local department workers we interviewed, sometimes this isn't enough to cover their clients' childcare needs. For example, some childcare facilities have additional fees that they charge that aren't covered by the subsidy, like activity fees or registration fees over $100. Additionally, as I'll discuss later, sometimes finding a childcare provider willing to take the subsidy is difficult. However, even though their clients have childcare needs that can exceed what the childcare subsidy can do, DSS's current policy is unclear on whether local departments can use view service funds for additional childcare expenses above and beyond what the childcare subsidy can cover. Because of this guidance, there's substantial variation in how local departments will use view funds for childcare services not covered by the subsidy. Since childcare is one of the most commonly cited barriers to employment, and childcare is scarce statewide, especially for infants and toddlers, DSS should revise their policy to encourage the use of these funds for childcare services that exceed what the subsidy can cover. Slide 32 summarizes our recommendations for how DSS could encourage the spending of youth service funds on services to support clients' employment and improved earning potential. Madam Chair, that was a relatively long section, so I'll pause here for any questions.
Okay, good, thank you. Are there questions?
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
If
Now
we're
get
looking
on.
at slides 21 and 22. On slide 22, we see a marked increase in the employment rates for folks who are engaged in workforce development. But in 21, we see a drastic drop in those participating, and those seem to be contradictory. I guess the bigger part of that question, did y'all identify any reason for the marked drop in participation from 18 to 22 fiscal years?
I think some of that, Delegate Ora, some of that I think is likely due to the pandemic between those two periods. I think it's largely the drop in participation is likely due to the pandemic, and the view work requirements were suspended during that time period as well, during the pandemic from March 2020 through January of 2023, which was a relatively long period of time. So that's why you wouldn't quite see an uptick yet.
And follow up to that.
Yeah.
Do any of the recommendations reflect that in slide 22, obviously it works to improve their status if they're engaged in that? So do any of these recommendations reflect how we can get them enrolled and participating in the workforce development?
Delegate Orrock, there are a few recommendations that should help improve the coordination between the local departments and workforce region, which in theory should help improve participation of the view clients in these programs. And in particular, we think that co-locating some Virginia career work staff at local departments of social services where they're more accessible to clients could really help clients enroll in these programs and have access to these services that they could really use to help improve their employment situation.
Thank you.
Okay,
I guess, Madam Chair,
yes, Senator McCarthy.
I guess this question sort of bridges this section and the previous section, because you said that the local departments opt in or can opt in, or is it all requirement in terms of offering additional employment training availability back on page 8?
Yeah, so Senator McPike, that's referring to the SNAP employment and training program, SNAP ENT. And local departments, yes, they have the option to opt into that program or not. And currently 37 departments are doing that. It's not covered in this briefing, but in the report, we do have a policy option about potentially requiring those departments to participate in the SNAP employment and training program.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Are there any significant differences between rural Virginia and urban Virginia in the participation levels?
Delegate Austin, no, we didn't find any significant difference in the participation levels between rural Virginia and other parts of the state.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Our next finding in this section is that most VIEW clients are not engaging in a sufficient number of hours of work, training, education, or other work-related activities to meet the VIEW program's requirements. Slide 34 provides a summary of what the work requirements are for VIEW clients. Clients are required to participate in 30 to 35 hours of work experience, education, or training each week. There are a few activities not listed here that can count towards the work requirements, but they can only count for up to 15 hours. These are things like GED classes, English language classes, or basic skills. Most VIEW clients are not meeting the work participation requirements. Since 2017, 60% or more of VIEW clients haven't been participating in a work experience at least 30 hours per week. There could be reasons why clients aren't meeting the work requirements other than that they're just not participating. For example, after assessing a client, a worker could determine that the best course of action would be to assign the client to an activity that doesn't count towards the work participation rate. For example, a client without a high school diploma might be best served by focusing on GED or basic skills classes, at least initially. The way to determine whether clients are just not complying with the program requirements versus clients who are assigned to something that doesn't meet the work requirements would be to review the number of sanctions issued relative to the percentage of clients participating in the program. Local workers are supposed to issue sanctions when a client doesn't comply with the program's requirements. Federal law requires states to have a sanction policy in their TANF program, but it doesn't specify what the sanctions have to be. ESS policy requires that local departments sanction clients for not complying with program requirements by suspending TANF payments for at least 1 month. When we interviewed local departments, they reported that they commonly sanction clients, both before the pandemic and since the VIEW work requirements resumed this year. However, DSS data on sanctions did not validate local claims of commonly sanctioning clients. Their data shows far fewer sanctions being issued than the number reported by local departments. This means that we're not able to know whether sanctions are being applied appropriately when clients don't meet the program requirements. The report recommends that DSS improve its monitoring around the compliance with VIEW work requirements and sanction policies. Our next finding is that the VIEW program's design and policies encourage participating in activities that are leading to relatively low-paying, dead-end, and unstable jobs. In the cohort of clients who participated in VIEW in 2018, we reviewed the types of industries they worked in and the wages they were making in 2022. So that's approximately 4 years after they participated in VIEW. We found that 69% of clients in that cohort who were working in 2022 were employed at jobs where they were either working less than full-time, working inconsistently, or they weren't making minimum wage. The top industries where most of these clients were employed were administrative services, which included temp jobs and call centers, retailers, restaurants, hotels, and home health. All industries where limited hours, inconsistent work, and low wages are common. These findings are pretty consistent with what studies in other states have found about the types of jobs that self-sufficiency clients end up working at. National research suggests that programs that integrate skill building and employment can often result in better outcomes for their participants. DSS's current policy allows workers to assign participants to multiple activities. For example, pairing some hours of technical training with some hours of working. The data indicates that few clients participate in more than one activity at a time. Additionally, client planning could include both short-term goals for the client to accomplish while participating in VIEW and long-term goals for the client to continue working on after they exit the program. This type of planning would likely require an interdisciplinary team with participation of social services workers, Virginia Career Works workers, and potentially community action agency staff. They could develop service plans for clients that expand beyond the client's time in VIEW and help the client identify how they can access services through programs like WIOA upon exit. Finally, for some clients, incentives to participate in training and skill building activities might be helpful. For many clients with very low incomes, finding a low paying job may be the best course of action because they need the funds from that job to make ends meet. Participating in training or educational programs might mean forgoing the wages from that job. For some clients, providing a financial incentive for participating in training and educational programs might help. Slide 41 summarizes recommendations that the General Assembly consider authorizing DSS to operate limited pilot programs to evaluate the effectiveness of longer-term interdisciplinary approach to planning for VIEW clients and offering incentives to VIEW clients to participate in complete training and educational programs. Madam Chair, I'll pause here for questions.
Okay, are there questions? Yes,
Madam Chair.
Senator McPike.
There's a lot here to dig into. I'll focus on the second bullet, which is the recommendation to design and implement a pilot program to incentivize clients to participate in education and training programs. It seems to me like the work participation hours and the non-attainment of compliance, whether it be the hours worked or others, is an indication based on the service industry, which a lot of the folks participating are working 20 or 29, but they don't achieve 30 because of the way the nature of the market, nor do they have a consistent schedule. You don't know week to week whether you're working a Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday based on that industry's cadence. This recommendation doesn't have anything tie into the actual employers or the industry. That is sort of my question, because that seems to be a nexus of how do you have someone comply with the program? It seems like we've set people up for failure. If you say you've got to meet 30 hours, yet the industry is only going to give you 29 hours for obvious reasons, for healthcare and other benefits. Like, how do we deal with the employer side of this, either incentive or other structure? Because when you have an inconsistent schedule, you're not getting enough hours, you still need the money, you're never going to give up the money, right? You still have to have money to pay the bills. And so it seems to me that we got to figure out a different way to tackle this, and not just client issue, but what other incentives overall structurally can we put in place to help people actually achieve and not give them a slap on the wrist or take away 10 of benefits if they're not meeting hours. It seems to be a complete structural failure.
I'll try to answer some of
There's a lot there, so sorry.
So I think that, where this recommendation is coming from is that when VIEW clients are assigned to activities, they can be assigned to more activities. So if they have a job for 15, 20, 30 hours a week, that can be one of their activities. If the activity doesn't meet that sort of full 30 hours, they can be assigned to another activity like training or education. But as you point out, many times people can't afford to give up the money, that job that they need. And so the thought behind this recommendation is that it might be helpful to offer financial incentives to few individuals to participate in these employment and training programs for 10 or 15 hours a week of their participation, so that they wouldn't be giving up the wages from that job that they might need.
Just one follow-up.
Yes, Senator McPike.
I just, it's a great recommendation. I just have a concern because the inconsistent schedule within those industries, again, not knowing whether you're working a Monday, a Thursday night, the schedules are all over the place for families that are working through this. So food for thought.
Madam Chair, the team wanted me to pass along to Senator McPike that one of the things that is subsidized employment. Another term for that is the full program. That does provide the number of hours that someone is employed through that employer. The state is funding the cost of that. I think what we found is that it's very little utilized. But I think that's what you're getting. That is doing more of that to encourage employers to offer these particular clients more hours, but not take on that they might perceive doing so, having the state take on some of that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, these next two sections of the briefing focus on the childcare portion. Lack of access to affordable childcare can be a significant barrier to self-sufficiency. Research literature indicates that without childcare, parents are often forced to reduce their work hours, take lower level or lower paying jobs, or drop out of the workforce altogether. Although this can be a significant barrier to self-sufficiency for lower income families, lack of affordable childcare can be a significant barrier to employment for any family. Childcare is delivered in a public-private market in Virginia. Childcare providers operate in a private market, with federal and state governments funding care for some children. Additionally, some childcare is regulated by the state and considered formal care, while other childcare is considered informal. There are 6,700 formal childcare providers in Virginia, but no reliable data on the number of informal childcare providers in Virginia. Our first finding here is that childcare is unaffordable to many Virginia families, especially families with younger children. Based on data collected through our survey of Virginia childcare providers, we found that Virginia families are paying anywhere from $100 to $440 per week per child for childcare. This can amount to $6,000 to $22,000 annually per child. In the map you see on slide 46, we divide that up by broad regions of the state, by whether the care was being delivered in a childcare center or a family day home, and the age range of the child. Rates for infant care at childcare centers tend to be the most expensive type of care, with rates declining a bit as children age. Childcare is considered to be affordable when a family is spending no more than 7% of their income on childcare. Slide 47 shows the percentage of Virginia families with children who can afford childcare costs for young children. The price of childcare for a single infant is unaffordable to 85% of Virginia families with children. Childcare for a single toddler is unaffordable to 82% of families, and childcare for a single preschooler is unaffordable for 74% of Virginia families. Slide 48 shows these same calculations for households with lower incomes below 300% of the federal poverty line. Childcare prices for a single infant, toddler, or preschooler are unaffordable for nearly all lower income families. We also found that there's a shortage of available childcare slots, especially for infants and toddlers. As I mentioned earlier, Virginia has 6,700 formal childcare providers, and those providers can serve up to 470,000 children. Over 60% of those slots are at childcare centers, and the rest are at schools, community organizations, religious institutions, and family day homes. The demand for childcare exceeds supply, though, and Virginia needs at least 140,000 more childcare slots to meet the demand for care. We estimated the demand for childcare based on Census Bureau data about the number of children where both parents were working. We estimated the number of slots available by adding together the number of licensed slots plus the number of informal slots. We estimated the number of informal childcare slots based on data from a couple of recent Census Bureau surveys. Ultimately, we estimated that 990,000 childcare slots are likely available. We think this is an overestimate of the number of slots available because it assumes that licensed providers are operating at their licensed maximum capacity, and we know that they're not. That leaves us with a minimum unmet demand of 140,000 childcare slots, but the number may be substantially larger than that. Additionally, this doesn't take into account whether the available slots were affordable. The availability of childcare slots for infants and toddlers is especially low. The state needs at least 33,000 infant toddler slots, but this doesn't account for affordability, distance, or parent preference, so the actual number could be much higher. The need for infant toddler slots was greatest in the eastern, northern, and western regions of the state. Slide 53 shows the number of infant toddler slots needed by region. As you can see, the need is greatest in the northern and eastern region. Additionally, although the western region doesn't need as many slots as the eastern and northern region, it has the highest unmet need in terms of children per slot. There were 2.3 infants and toddlers per slot available to them. We also heard in interviews that in rural regions of the state especially, the distances that parents have to drive to find care can be excessive. The reason for the shortage of infant and toddler slots is the high cost associated with operating those slots. The child to staff ratio for infants and toddlers is much lower than it is for older children, and that means that providers need more employees to staff their infant and toddler rooms, which drives up the cost of those slots. Slide 55 discusses the impact of regulations on the cost of childcare. Regulations do increase the cost of childcare, with minimum required staffing ratios having the largest impact on cost. However, when compared to staffing ratios in other states, Virginia's ratios were relatively similar to the ratios in other states. And if you're interested in more details on that comparison, one of the report's appendices has more detail on how Virginia's regulations for childcare compare to other states. Additionally, in our survey of childcare providers and our interviews with childcare providers and stakeholders, most expressed a feeling that the staffing ratios were relatively reasonable. In terms of other regulations, Virginia's background check requirements for childcare providers do appear to be stricter than other states and the federal requirements. However, there are some advantages and disadvantages to making changes to that, which are fleshed out more in Chapter 6 of the report. Finally, we did find that material in the state's required training for childcare staff is not always useful and applicable to staff, and it might be a poor use of staff time. The report recommends the DOE revise the training to be differentiated by types of childcare, ages of children served, and different staff roles to ensure that it's relevant, useful, and applicable to staff. Finally, staffing challenges appear to be at the root of the childcare access and affordability issue. Childcare workers are generally earning relatively low wages, wages that would put many of these workers below the self-sufficiency standard. Because of this, childcare workers tend to experience significant turnover, and hiring and retaining childcare workers is reportedly a significant challenge for providers. The availability and affordability of childcare are each linked to staff compensation, but in opposite ways. Higher compensation leads to more staffing, increasing the availability of care, but increasing the cost and decreasing the affordability of care. Lower compensation decreases operating costs, lowering the cost of care paid by parents, but can lead to staffing shortages that limit providers' capacity. This dynamic makes it challenging to take action that will increase access to childcare as well as making it more affordable. Madam Chair, I'll pause here for questions.
Hey, are there questions? Don't see any.
This final section reviews the state's options for improving access to affordable childcare. State government has historically had a relatively small role in childcare. The state's role has generally been limited to administering the childcare subsidy, licensing and regulating childcare providers, and funding early childhood development programs like VPI. Recently, the state has become more involved with ensuring quality of early childhood programs through the VQB5 initiative. We found that the child care subsidy improves access and affordability, but federally funded expansions of the program will end in fiscal year 24. Virginia used federal pandemic relief funds to expand the child care subsidy program in a variety of ways. The funds were used in fiscal year 23 and 24 to increase reimbursement rates that are paid to subsidy vendors, expand the eligibility criteria for families with young children so that more families qualified, reduce the copayment so that no family receiving the subsidy paid more than 7% of their income for care, allowed parents looking for work to qualify for the subsidy, and eliminated wait lists. All told, by the end of fiscal year 23, the number of children receiving the subsidy was just over 40,000, which was more than a 50% increase in the number of children being served since fiscal year 20. However, the federal funds have expired, and DOE projects that they'll have exhausted the funds by the end of this fiscal year. Additionally, the Appropriation Act language that allowed these expansions had a sunset clause set for the end of this fiscal year. We estimate that the cost of maintaining all of these expansions would be approximately $319 million annually. Only some of the expansions could be continued. So just the reimbursement rate increase, the copay reductions, eligibility expansion, and the ability to use job search to qualify. But we estimate that the cost of that would still be around $265 million annually. These costs would be in addition to the $130 million in base federal funds that support the program. Slide 62 summarizes some of the impacts of maintaining funding for the child care subsidy expansions or not. If the funds are not maintained, depending on decisions made regarding reimbursement rates and copays, anywhere from 24,000 to 28,000 children would lose access to their child care subsidy next year, resulting in child care subsidy enrollment dropping from 40,000 children to between 11,600 and 16,000 children. Chapter 7 and one of the report's appendices provides more information about options for the future of the child care subsidy and some of the trade-offs that are involved. One of the findings that we have that's discussed in more depth in Chapter 7 of the report is that even though there's been an increase in the number of children receiving child care subsidies, it's still reportedly difficult, especially in some areas of the state, to find a child care provider willing to accept the child care subsidy. Our next finding is related to one of the reasons that providers may be unwilling to become or remain child care subsidy vendors. We found that the child care subsidy program has a vendor reimbursement process that can be burdensome and time consuming, and it can deter providers from becoming vendors or remaining vendors. Currently, subsidy vendors are paid based on children's attendance, which is tracked using a swipe card system, whereby parents are required to swipe a card every time they drop their child off for care. According to child care providers, local departments of social services workers, and other stakeholders, the current swipe card system is riddled with problems. First, the system is old and swipe card machines frequently don't work. Additionally, if a parent doesn't swipe a card for a day of care because they forgot to, or because a different family member or friend dropped the child off for care and didn't have the card, there's cumbersome and confusing process required to process the backdated swipe. Finally, there's some stigma associated with the swipe cards because they're an indicator that a child is receiving subsidized care. This creates extra burdens for providers who need to follow up with parents to get the card swiped, even when the missed swipes might have happened because of a malfunctioning machine. Other states have implemented systems that pay for the child care subsidy based on enrollment. These systems still require that providers take attendance and report it to the state, but they use less burdensome means to do that. And then these states apply an attendance threshold whereby they only pay for the child care based on enrollment if the child attended a certain number of days. The Appropriation Act required DOE to transition to an enrollment-based system beginning in fiscal year 23, but DOE hasn't implemented it yet. DOE reports that they're re-procuring for a new reimbursement system that will allow enrollment-based reimbursement subject to an attendance threshold. The report makes two recommendations related to the reimbursement system. First, the report recommends that the General Assembly direct DOE to reimburse vendors based on enrollment on an ongoing basis. And second, the report recommends that DOE and DSS work together to begin reimbursing childcare vendors based on enrollment as soon as possible. Our final finding in this section is that Virginia has implemented most of the strategies used in other states to expand access to affordable childcare. States have limited options to improve the availability and affordability of childcare aside from the income-based subsidy program. One of the main reasons for the state's limited options is that childcare operates in a private market. Virginia has implemented nearly all of the approaches most commonly used in other states to improve access and affordability. For example, Virginia is in the process of reviewing its childcare regulations for opportunities to reduce regulatory burden on providers. Virginia has significantly but temporarily expanded aspects of the childcare subsidy program. And Virginia has many initiatives to incentivize staff and providers to enter and stay in the childcare market. However, the state could consider expanding some or all of these initiatives. For example, the state could put more funding into Recognize V5, which is a program that provides retention bonuses to teachers. The state could also put more funding into the mixed delivery program, which provides free preschool in private settings for at-risk 3- and 4-year-olds. Another example of where the state could opt to invest more funds would be the Fast Track program, which is a program operated by the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation that provides accelerated certification, paid training, and bonuses to new childcare staff at participating providers. One of the appendices has a description of these childcare initiatives that Virginia has already implemented. Finally, the 2023 General Assembly established the Commission on Early Childhood Care and Education. The commission is charged with identifying ways to expand access to childcare and improve the early childhood care and education workforce. The commission is also charged with developing recommendations for financing the state's early childhood care and education system. The commission is required to publish recommendations in October of each year. Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take other questions.
Thank you. Are there questions for Stephanie? Madam Chair. I'll start with you and then you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Stephanie, I'm going to preface this by saying the question I'm going to ask is probably outside the scope and timing of your study, but I'm going to ask it anyway. See, over in the last session, we did a very comprehensive integration of our workforce development system in the Commonwealth, and I'm sure it's an ongoing process for that to be rolled out. Do you know if any of the elements of that workforce development integration address any of the recommendations that are included here?
That's a good question, and it is a little outside the scope of the study, but as far as we can tell, the VIEW and the SNAP ENT programs have not been considered for inclusion in that, enrolling those into the new workforce development system. And so it's one of the recommendations that we have towards the end of chapter 3, I believe, that recommends that the administration and leaders at DSS and the new workforce agency consider whether it would be appropriate to move some or all elements of the VIEW and the TANF, the VIEW and the SNAP ENT program over to the new workforce agency.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Locke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I sit on the Commission on Early Childhood Care and Education. And at our last meeting in September, what became very clear in terms of a takeaway was that there's a significant gap between available funding and funding that's needed to continue to meet family demand for childcare. And that became very clear here in this report. What I did not see in terms of recommendations, particularly since the federal pandemic recovery funds are going away, is what are the projections or what are your recommendations that are coming forth, or what's going to be coming forth to support access to quality, affordable childcare for eligible families when this federal funding goes away?
Senator Locke, that's an excellent question. And so the report has the section on the child care subsidy, and the federal funds that are going away have supported all these expansions to the child care subsidy that have been made in the past couple of years. And so we're estimating that the cost of continuing those would be about $319 million to maintain the same access to care that we have today in the next year.
So it Madam
Yes,
Chair,
sure.
so it falls to the General Assembly. Yes. Okay. So I have a second question. So then it falls to the General Assembly to meet this demand for childcare to ensure this robust economy and the needed workforce.
Senator Locke.
Right, Delegate Knight? Okay, okay, Delegate Knight and Delegate Orrock.
Yeah, I see in here, of course, what you said, $380 million. This is money the federal government gave us. We knew it wasn't going to last. We knew that. One question is, I think there's a lot of states, all states got some type of money in this. A lot of states didn't use it for this particular purpose because they knew that what was coming on. And maybe you could let me know how many states didn't use it because they were going to be in this particular quandary?
Delegate Knight, that's a good question. And as far as we know, Virginia, one of very few, if not the only state that's used, the funds in this way, but the team can go back and give you some follow-up on that question. But I know that we are one of the few states that have used it in this way.
Yes, Delegate Knight.
Then I noticed you put on here, you were going to look at doing this. One thing that I really do agree with what you said is the enrollment based on attendance thresholds. You know, because we have chronic absenteeism, we can't teach our younger kids and everything, you know, so that's a good thing. But specifically to Senator Locke's question or something there, I'm gonna appeal with her. She's got a whole lot more juice than these folks than I do. But I do understand that 71% of Payne understand that this is a problem. And they're, I think, working about it. Maybe get us these funds back. They're the ones that kind of put an unfunded mandate on the state of Virginia because Congress, gave us this money to help us in a time when we needed help. You know, sometimes it's hard to fund the problem and pull the plug on it. So I'm going to stand beside Senator Locke, asking Kane and Warner, but she got more juice than I got.
Delegate Ora.
Madam Chairman, if May, in general, looking at the availability and affordability section, I made note, y'all had no recommendation. Because at the end of the day, it appears the report says it's a catch-22. In order to have more availability, you're going to have to increase the cost, ergo making it less affordable. And so y'all's recommendation is good luck. Okay.
Further questions? Okay. Thank you. Ordinarily, at this time, the administration would give their comments on the report. They've chosen not to do so. So I've taken the chairman's prerogative, which I don't know if it exists, but I created it, to invite Kathy Glasser to speak to us about this report. I'm sure everyone knows of her work on early childhood education, but I haven't actually seen her. I hope. Yeah, good. Thank you, Kathy. And we gave her very little time to read it and prepare. So I appreciate your coming.
You appreciate the invitation to provide specifically chapter 6 and 7, which is addressing childcare availability and affordability, is part of this report just presented. And as stated, I'm with the Virginia Early Childhood Foundation, and my comments are from the foundation's behalf. I want to first congratulate the JLARC team for their thorough research and analysis of these critical issues. The report cogently and succinctly describes the complex interconnectedness of gaps in childcare access, affordability, availability, and the persistent challenges these gaps create for children, families, and the Commonwealth. Much like JLARC, the foundation mission and work is evidence-based, data-driven, and grounded in nonpartisanship. We strive to serve as a trusted private partner, bringing sustained focus, insights, and innovation to Virginia's early education efforts. Virginia has never been in a stronger position with its early care and education system for children from birth to age 5. Significant progress has been made to ensure accountability, increased access, to support quality, and provide choice for families as we work toward a best-in-class system. The pandemic highlighted that childcare challenges impact more than just individual families. Childcare impacts schools, hospitals, public safety, and businesses of all sizes. Childcare undergirds our economy, workforce, and quality of life, and is essential to society. And as the report articulates so well, this is especially true for low-income families striving for self-sufficiency. With federal relief funding, childcare programs were able to continue to operate during the pandemic, even when K-12 schools were closed. As the pandemic receded and the economy started to recover, Virginia previously used this temporary funding to expand access and affordability for low and moderate income Virginia families. This investment has contributed to the highest workforce participation rate in a decade and the record low unemployment rates. By increasing participation in quality childcare, Virginia is generating significant short and long-term benefits from this investment. A recent cost-benefit analysis conducted by Vanderbilt University estimated that the additional $309 million invested in early education in fiscal year 23 supported the following outcomes. More than 11,000 additional children under the age of 5 participated in high-quality early education services throughout the year. Nearly 11,000 more mothers entered the workforce, which in turn has led to more than 5,500 children being lifted out of poverty. Within 1 year, the investment of $309 million is generating a return of $364 million in increased family earnings and disposable income, with more than $30 million going back to the state in tax revenue. And over the long term, Virginians will see conservatively nearly $800 million return from combined cost savings and economic benefits. The analysis also noted that on the flip side, inadequate infant and toddler child care currently costs Virginia an estimated $3 billion per year. That's billion with a B. So with expanded access and improved affordability, more Virginia children are prepared for success in school and life. More families are able to go to work and support their families, and Virginia has a stronger labor force and economy for all. But as the report states, the temporary funding and policies that supported its success are expiring, and Virginia will very soon have a difficult choice to make. The Virginia success story will continue, or we could see a significant reversal in economic gains for Virginia's families and the Commonwealth. Let's be clear that Virginia is not alone. Every state is facing the challenge of federal recovery funds ending. So for all of us, success hinges on how we choose to respond to these challenges. This challenge is an opportunity for Virginia to accelerate progress and gains, not to take our foot off the gas pedal, so that Virginia can remain a top state for business with the best workforce in the nation. Virginia has a long track record of bipartisan support for early education across the executive and legislative branches, innovative leadership from its employer community, an increasingly capable childcare sector, and the power of families whose demand and choices on behalf of their youngest children drive our early education system. This will not be easy and will take participation from all sectors to be successful. But as the report affirms, it has never been more clear that affordable access to quality childcare is key to Virginia's economic prosperity, and that strategic public investments are essential, effective, and will deliver both short and long-term benefits for our Commonwealth. I'd like to thank JLARC again for the significant study, and Madam Chair for the invitation to this.
Thank you, Kathy, for your decades-long commitment to our youngest Virginians. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I ask
Yeah.
a question? Kathy,
Sure.
would you please, can you answer a question, please? Do we have a sliding scale in Virginia that would allow a parent to pay on a participation level of their income?
Would you mind repeating the question for me?
Do we currently have in place a sliding scale based on the parent's ability to contribute to their child care in Virginia today?
Yes, for families that are receiving the child care subsidy, there is a sliding scale. And it for the lowest income families, they may not need to pay anything for their child care. And for families that are on the higher end, but still receiving a child care subsidy, they may be paying up to 7% of their income for child care. And that's with the current co-payment requirements that are in place with the expansions for the child care subsidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep. Okay, thank you, Kathy. Okay, next on the agenda is the report on eligibility for enhanced retirement benefits. How?
That's correct, Madam Chair. Next up is the enhanced benefits review. This review was directed by a study resolution passed by this commission after the money committees at JLARC examined whether several state and local public safety occupations should be eligible for enhanced benefits. Each of the occupations asked for review was put through a structured and rigorous evaluation to produce the analysis and the information needed for the General Assembly to make informed decisions about whether to give these occupations enhanced retirement benefits. I'd like to thank the staff of the Virginia Retirement System for their assistance in conducting this work. I'll now turn it over to Kimberly Sarfay. We'll call.
Thank you, Helen. Good morning, Madam Chair. I just want to briefly make several points that may be helpful for y'all to hear as you're thinking through the presentation this morning. First, as Hal indicated, we did conduct a rigorous assessment of the appropriateness of providing enhanced retirement benefits to various public safety occupations. And as part of our review, we looked at whether any other states effective and methodological approach to providing these benefits. And we really didn't find much. So the working here today, prior to our work we've done in this area, with some improvements and additional nuances. As you will hear in a moment, the assessment compares public safety occupations to each other on key criteria for when enhanced benefits would be appropriate. However, I do want to emphasize that just because an occupation does not rate high on the criteria does not mean that the occupation does not have an important public safety role. We are not confident in the overall importance of these occupations in terms of public safety. We are just providing information to help inform decisions on whether enhanced retirement benefits are appropriate. Finally, the report does not include recommendations for which occupations should receive enhanced retirement benefits. And that's because where the General Assembly decides to draw the line in terms of who should receive enhanced benefits is really a policy decision. Now, we will give you some very good and objective information to help make. And now I'd like to introduce Jamie Bitts, who is our Chief Analyst for Online Oversight, and who will be presenting findings.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the commission. As Kimberly said, my name is Jamie Bitts, and I was the project leader for this review. I'll be presenting the results from our review of enhanced benefits for public safety occupations. This slide just shows you the resolution passed by JLARC last year, which directed us to review the eligibility of public safety occupations for enhanced retirement benefits, including whether it's appropriate to provide enhanced benefits to any additional occupations in Virginia, and then also the estimated cost of doing so. The study resolution was passed and House Appropriations Committee asked JLARC staff to examine whether several state and local public safety occupations should be eligible for enhanced benefits. And those occupations are listed here on slide 3. In terms of our primary research activities, those are listed here in slide 4. We did interviews with a number of public safety occupations, including all of those that were referred to us by the Senate and House Appropriations and Finance Committees. We surveyed all 28 included in our review, and then we also analyzed workers' compensation claims data for all of those occupations as well. This slide just summarizes ability and demand for the occupations that we were asked to review. And you can see that they do vary quite a bit. And in a few minutes, I'll spend more time talking about each of these occupations in much more detail. Madam Chair, I have 3 parts to my presentation this morning, and I'll start with some very brief background information. Enhanced retirement benefits are intended to allow the men and women in public safety occupations to retire early. And that's because many of these jobs are more physically and psychologically demanding than a typical office job. They become harder to perform as someone ages, and that can jeopardize the safety of fellow employees and officers, as well as, maybe most importantly, the general public. And it is worth pointing out that this is the purpose of enhanced benefits for federal law enforcement, mainly to keep the federal law enforcement workforce both young and vigorous, and able to meet the demands of that. Enhanced benefits are more generous than the benefits for a typical state or local employee. They allow someone to retire earlier with fewer years of service. They usually have a higher multiplier that results in a higher monthly benefit. And then in some cases, they may also include a hazardous duty supplement, which currently is a totals a little bit more than $1,400 a month. Slide 9 just shows you some of the public safety occupations that are already eligible for enhanced benefits in Virginia. At the state level, that includes DOC correctional officers and Virginia State Police troopers. Political subdivisions are required to provide enhanced benefits for sheriff and deputy sheriffs, and then they have the option of providing them for other occupations like firefighters and police departments. And Madam Chair, I'll pause briefly just to in case there are questions at this point.
Any questions? Nope.
And I'll turn now to the responsibility and demand levels, public safety occupations that were asked. There are two guidelines that should be used to determine whether enhanced are appropriate for a given public safety occupation. First, employees in the occupation have a high level of responsibility for others, including the general public. Second, employees should have physically and psychologically demanding jobs that are harder to perform as they age. Now, we use three criteria to assess whether an occupation is that first guideline, a level of safety responsibility. First, their obligation through enforcement of the state's criminal laws. Second, their responsibility. Responder. Third, their impact of their job. Fellow officers and we use 6 criteria to assess whether an occupation is that second guideline, physical and psychological demands, workers' compensation claims, personal assault, vehicle accidents, fire-related incidents, other accidents, health conditions that can develop. And then finally, there are 2 changes to the criteria that are listed here from the criteria. 2008. One, we added a workers' compensation criterion so that we could capture the actual work-related job injuries that the public safety employees have experienced. And then 2, we added a criterion related to the mental health effects of working in public safety occupations. And we did that in recognition, we think, is the much broader awareness and recognition of mental health today. So we use those guidelines and criteria that I just talked about to assess the relative levels of responsibility for each of the 28 public safety occupations that we've reviewed. So, put it another way, we did was compare the responsibility and demand levels of each occupation to all of the other 28, 27, I should say, occupations included in the study. And those assessments were primarily based on analysis of the workers' compensation claims data, as well as the surveys we did. Slide 15 just shows you the levels of responsibility for the occupations that already receive enhanced retirement benefits. Again, they do vary quite a bit, starting at the top of the table with state, local police, police officers, all of whom have high levels of safety responsibility, high levels. So the first occupation that we looked at, talk about, is local animal control officers, generally responsible for enforcing state and local animal-related laws, so responding to calls involving domestic wild animals, either in danger or that pose a danger to others. And they're often seizing those animals and having to take them to animal control officers have a moderate level of public safety responsibility. Based on our survey, they have a moderate potential to directly affect the safety of others. And they typically have authority to enforce only animal related laws and not all criminal laws of the Commonwealth. They face a relatively high level of demand compared to other occupations. They do have one of the highest rates of workers' compensation claims of any public safety occupation that we looked at. And it's about 17% of them that are filing a paid claim in any given year. They also face a relatively high risk of encountering violent or threatening individuals. I should say, being injured when they have to restrain large or aggressive animals. And this slide just summarizes that animal control officers face or have a moderate level of public safety responsibility and face a high level of demand. And we're showing that compared to the occupations that are already receiving enhanced benefits. The cost of to a locality of providing enhanced benefits to animal control officers is going to vary. It's going to vary based on factors like the locality size and employee demographics. As part of the study, we worked with VRS to develop cost estimates for a subset of large, medium, and small localities around the state. And based on that, a locality's retirement costs could increase from 0.1 to 1.1% the first year. And in dollar terms, the highest estimate was an additional $181,000 that first year. And that was for one large locality. And then the locality's contribution rate was estimated to increase by 0.02 to 0.1 percentage points. The next occupation we looked at was law enforcement rangers with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, or DCR. They are responsible for enforcing all criminal laws at state parks and natural area preserves. Their law enforcement activities typically include things like foot patrols, traffic stops, and then responding to medical emergencies. And they do have substantial non-law enforcement activities. And so these would be things like park maintenance and interpretive programs for the public. DCR rangers have a moderate level of public safety responsibility. As I said, they're responsible for enforcing all criminal laws of the Commonwealth, and they respond to calls for emergency assistance at a moderate frequency compared to other occupations. They do face a high level of demand compared to other public safety occupations. They're encountering violent or threatening individuals more often than many occupations. This is also the case for other physical demands like having to move over difficult terrain or moving heavy objects. And they have a moderate rate of workers' compensation claims and a relatively high amount of benefits paid per claim. And again, this slide just shows you in the case of DCR law enforcement, their moderate responsibility and high demand levels compared to the occupations that are already receiving enhanced benefits. And then in terms of cost, if the state provided enhanced benefits to rangers, DCR's retirement costs are estimated to increase 21% the first year, and that would be a little over $800,000 in additional retirement spending for the agency. We were also asked to review 911 dispatchers, and this includes local dispatchers as well as those with Virginia State Police. Local 911 dispatchers are receiving obviously a broad range of calls. This includes everything from medical emergencies to car accidents, domestic violence, and suspicious person reports. State police dispatchers are typically getting these same types of calls. They are getting them typically through that #77 number that you see on the highways. And then they're also getting calls that are transferred from local dispatch centers. Dispatchers have a high level of public safety responsibility. They're often the first public safety employees to become involved in an emergency. And not surprisingly, there is a high potential for their job performance to affect the safety of 911 callers themselves, as well as other first responders who are obviously relying on the dispatchers for information about an incident. The overall level of demand that they face is minimal compared to other public safety occupations. And that's just because they don't face or are exposed to many of the physical demands that other public safety occupations are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And so these would be things like motor vehicle accidents, in-person personal assaults. But they are at a very high risk for negative mental health effects from the work that they do. They have moderate to high rates of mental health related workers' compensation claims. And that's because they are routinely taking these very traumatic and I think psychologically difficult calls from the public, and then in many cases having to move on to the very next phone call. And again, this slide shows in the case of dispatchers, just how their responsibility and demand levels compare to the other occupations that are receiving enhanced benefits. In terms of cost, the estimated cost of providing enhanced benefits to state police dispatchers is a little less than $1 million the first year, and it would increase the agency's retirement costs by an estimated 2.3%. And then based on the cost estimates that were developed for a subset of localities, providing enhanced benefits to local dispatchers is estimated to increase their retirement spending by anywhere from 0.5% in one large locality to as much as 25% in one very small locality. The next occupation that we looked at is juvenile detention specialists. They're responsible for supervising residents in juvenile detention facilities and ensuring their safety and overall order of the facilities. These are the local and regional juvenile detention facilities. And they're providing services for juveniles that have been accused of a crime or that have been found guilty of one. And these typically tend to be the more violent offenses. Juvenile detention specialists have a relatively low level of public safety responsibility compared to other occupations. And that's mainly because they are focused on ensuring order and safety within the facility that they're at, rather than enforcing criminal laws or responding to emergency calls for assistance out in the broader community. They do face a moderate level of demand. They have a high rate of workers' compensation claims that is comparable to the rates for local police and deputy sheriffs. They're at high risk for personal assaults by residents in the facility. And the workers' compensation claims very commonly involve some sort of altercation with a resident. And again, this slide shows you in the case of juvenile detention specialists, how their responsibility and demand levels compare to the other occupations receiving benefits. In terms of the cost of providing enhanced benefits for juvenile detention specialists, it's estimated to increase retirement costs for localities by about 1% the first year, and it was as high as $440,000 in additional costs for one large locality. And Madam Chair, I have just a few more occupations to go through.
Okay, thanks.
The next one is special investigators with the Department of Corrections. They conduct a broad range of investigations related to DOC operations, so mostly involving inmates and staff at state prisons. Examples would be investigations into drugs or other contraband that may be smuggled in or out of facilities, any kinds of assaults involving inmates or staff, and then inmate deaths. DOC special investigators have a relatively low level of public safety responsibility compared to the other occupations that we reviewed. They're designated as law enforcement in statute, but they're responsible for enforcing only those laws that are related to DOC's operations, rather than all criminal laws in the common law. And then based on our surveys, they have a relatively low potential to affect the safety of other investigators, other members of the public, or people in the facilities themselves. They do face a moderate level of demand of physical and psychological demands. The rate of workers' compensation claims is fairly moderate, with around 6% of staff filing claims each year, and they are at a moderate risk for other physical demands as well. And then again, this slide just shows you for DOC special investigators how their responsibility and demand levels compare to the groups already receiving enhanced benefits. Providing enhanced benefits for DOC special investigators is estimated to increase the agency's retirement costs by about 1.2% the first year, and that would be an additional about $814,000. Next occupation that we were asked to do is law enforcement officers with the Department of Motor Vehicles. They are responsible for enforcing laws related to DMV's operations. Their investigations involve things like fraudulent information to obtain a driver's license or a vehicle title. And their enforcement work typically includes things like executing search and arrest warrants, you conduct traffic checks around their state, and then also seizing illegal vehicle tags. DMV law enforcement officers have a relatively low level of public safety responsibility compared to other occupations we reviewed. They have authority to enforce all criminal laws, but their focus is on just those DMV related laws. Their job performance, based on our survey and the feedback we got from them, their job performance directly affects the safety of others less often than other occupations. And then they face a relatively low level of demand compared to other occupations. They have a very low rate of workers' compensation claims and a low amount of benefits paid per claim as well. And then they are at a relatively low risk for other things like personal assaults. Slide 44 again shows you, in this case for DMV law enforcement officers, how their levels of responsibility and demand compare to the other occupations receiving enhanced benefits at this point. And then in terms of costs, if DMV's law enforcement officers were to receive enhanced benefits, the agency's retirement costs are estimated to increase 11% or by about 1.5 million. And those would be estimates for that first year.
We just, excuse me, we just got a text that people are having trouble hearing you. And apparently the mic's going in and out. So if you could get just as close as possible and speak as loud as possible, that would probably help. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I hope that that's better for folks.
I do too.
The last occupation that we looked at is the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit investigators with the Office of the Attorney General. These investigators investigate cases involving Medicaid fraud. And so an example would be false claims submitted by providers. And it was only this past session that the unit was given legislative authority, statutory authority to hire investigators with full law enforcement authority. Prior to that, they were working with outside agencies to do the more difficult or dangerous parts of their investigations, like executing a search warrant or executing an arrest warrant. And so it's really too soon to assess the level of responsibility and demand that they face, or ultimately whether enhanced benefits are appropriate for them. And Madam Chair, I'll pause there and take any questions there may be about any of the occupations that I just talked about.
Delegate Ware has two short questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The answers may be long.
On slide 26, there's a specific note that local 911 calls 911 calls sometimes get transferred to the Virginia State Police. What circumstances would lead to that transfer?
A couple of different circumstances. We've been told by state police dispatchers that in some cases there are localities that will transfer really any kind of vehicle related call, car accident, whether it's on a major highway or a more local road. And then in other cases, calls are being transferred to state police because there is something taking place on a highway, or there is a chance that something would cross jurisdictional lines and involve multiple localities.
Thank you. Second question, Madam Chair, is on slide 30, on the estimate of costs for localities. One locality would be 0.5%, and another locality would be 1/4 of their retirement costs. That's a very wide disparity. What leads to the difference between those localities?
Sure. That's a good question, Delegate. In terms of the disparity, it is really driven by the size of the locality and the size of their retirement plan. And so in the case of a very large locality, providing enhanced benefits for dispatchers is maybe only going to have a very marginal impact on their overall level of retirement spending. On the other hand, for that case of a 25% increase in retirement spending, that in particular was a very small locality with a very small retirement plan. And so adding, what still has to be a fair number of 911 dispatchers to operate that local call center has a much more substantial impact on retirement spending in terms of the percentage increase.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you.
Delegate, 23 of the report on figure 3, there's a graphic that shows for the 8 localities that VRS provided illustrative costs, and you'll definitely see a correlation between locality size and cost for 911 dispatchers.
Thank you.
Finally, the last section of my presentation covers a number of additional issues that were referred to us or they came up. In the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'm happy to answer questions about any of them if there are questions. But I will take just a minute to talk about recruitment in public safety occupations. Some of the public safety staff for this review did say that enhanced benefits were needed to improve recruitment and retention. There are other strategies that address or improve these challenges. Now, in some cases, staff said it was difficult to compete with occupations that are able to provide enhanced benefits. And staff in several occupations said that being exposed to traumatic incidents that were psychologically difficult to deal with made it difficult for people to do the work long term and ultimately contributed to higher rates of turnover. We heard that particularly from dispatchers, but also from animal control officers as well. There are a number of strategies that are effective, improving recruitment for these types of occupations where psychological demand of the work is relatively high. And so slide 51 was several of them. They include higher salaries, signing and retention bonuses, particularly for people to deal with the traumas and the difficult psychological particularly difficult experiences that they may be involved in by virtue of working in a public safety occupation. And Madam Chair, that's everything I can talk about, but I'm certainly happy to answer any additional questions that may be.
Thank you. Are there further questions? I don't see any. Thank you so much.
Final presentation is our annual Chief Economic Development Report. I've asked you to give it an hour.
I think this happens to you every year.
It does. I don't know if I can miss it all. Members, again, let me now give you a brief overview of our state spending report. And what I'll do, and because of the timing, is I'll just kind of cover the first few slides because the second half of my presentation is basically the same every year. It's pretty much the same agencies and programs that are responsible for budget growth year after year. Slide 2 shows us the mandate, and I'll point out here that our report covers 10-year periods. This particular report covers fiscal year 14 to fiscal year 23. And I'll start out with fiscal year 23. So in that year, Virginia's total operating budget was $81 billion. This is actually a decrease from the total operating budget in fiscal year 22, which was $83 billion. The decrease is primarily because federal COVID-19 relief fund appropriations in fiscal year 23 were substantially less than they were in fiscal year 22. In fact, the non-general budget declined 10% in fiscal year 23. Primarily, again, because of the drop in federal COVID-19 relief funds. While the non-general fund budget declined, general fund budget continued to grow and has had above average growth for the last 2 years. Most of this growth occurred because of increased appropriations for DOE and DMAT and deposits of surplus revenues to the state's revenue reserve funds and the state retirement fund. Much of the general fund growth is because of various one-time appropriations of surplus revenue, some of which were quite large. For example, a large portion of the increase for DOE was one-time funding for school construction and modernization. The deposits to the state retirement fund is another example. Deposits to the reserve funds are sort of one-time in nature because they are very dependent on surplus revenue. That shows the trend in how the state budget has grown over the past 10 years. You look at the bottom line, general fund appropriations grew at a fairly low and steady rate through fiscal year 21, and then there's an uptick, which led to the annual growth rate averaging 6% per year over the 10-year period. This is higher than what I've usually reported in past presentations on this report. Overall, the non-general fund budget increased at a faster rate during the 10-year period, particularly after fiscal year 18, and this is because of the implementation of Medicaid expansion. You see a similar trend when you look at the top line, which is total appropriation. You see the growth in total appropriations increases more between fiscal year 22 and 23 than for the non-general fund budget, which again is the middle line. And again, this is because of growth in the general fund budget. This is another way of looking at it. Most of the slides and most of the report is not adjusted for inflation or population, but this slide and the next slide as well are adjusted for both of those factors. So I'll focus on the general fund budget, which is in the middle. When you control for inflation, the general fund budget growth reduces from 6% to just over 3% per year during the 10-year period. And when you also control for population, it reduces to just under 3%. And with that, I will end my prepared remarks,
but unless somebody else, like for me to go over any other slides or if you have any.
Questions? Thank you.
At that meeting, we'll present the findings from our Bureau of Commonwealth attorneys and public funding criminal defense attorneys. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, staff. As always, it was excellent. Is there any further business to come before the commission? Seeing none, we're adjourned.